My name is Rosalie Favell. I'm a Red River Metis from Winnipeg. I currently have been residing in Ottawa. I'm a photographer and painter, so I'm a visual artist. So the title of the exhibition, Belonging, is a good reflection of my searching for my roots, my understanding of being a Métis person. So early on, I made a series called Longing and Not Belonging. That was when I was searching and trying to figure out who am I. I grew up not really knowing or naming my Métis identity. That was just a sign of the times that I grew up in. So as I was growing and the Métis people were evolving and finding pride in talking about their past, my practice started to show that evolution in the work. The facing the camera, I had a moment where I thought, oh, I'm doing all this work about me. So I wanted to give something more directly back to the Indigenous art community. So at a residency, I started photographing the other people in the residency. And after that was over, I got home and thought, there's something here, to be able to represent and document these incredible artists, my colleagues, my friends, and so many more that I didn't know, but were practicing. And just this groundswell, this amazing group of people. And so I kept photographing and for a number of years. And when people would come to Ottawa, I would do their portrait. Or if I went to another gathering, I would take my camera and lights and do portraits. So technically, I started photographing with a 4x5 camera. And then I moved to, because I had that at the residency, moved to medium format film, and then eventually got comfortable with digital, so I started doing that. And I was following a formal look of the portraits that I had seen when I was studying photography by the photographer Richard Avedon, an American fashion visual artist photographer. And he did these portraits with a white background and the black border around, stating this is what I see in the image, and showing this edge. And I really like that unifying feature of the plain background, so that you could draw the individual out and focus on them, and not like, oh, what's in their house, or like they're out in the trees. Or so I started to print them in the darkroom, and I wasn't as good at getting the dust off and that. So I started to scan the negatives and make digital prints where I had cut the background out, whether it was a green screen or white, or I photographed in someone's house and made them stand up with something plain behind them. Once in Hawaii, I photographed someone wearing a lei headdress, and I stood them in front of a bush, and oh my goodness, cutting that out. So anyways, I started doing these portraits, and I was really thrilled that after 4 years I had about 75 portraits. And then I went to the Santa Fe Indian Market, and through the Institute of American Indian Art, I was there in residency, and over 4 days of the market, I photographed 175 people. So it's like, whoa. And so I just kept taking pictures, and it turned out to be 10 years of taking pictures, and I had 500 portraits. And then I stopped. I thought, okay, let's just stop. And then I was invited to do a residency 5 years later, and did about 30 more portraits. So that was my document that I was giving to the community. And some of those artists are no longer with us, and that's part of it, that I wanted to photograph them while they're here, while they're present. And I also photographed curators. They were at one of these gatherings and say, hey, what about us? And it's like, yeah, you're right. So I started expanding into the arts community. So in my own practice, I was looking at the history and trying to work out for myself, and I guess explain to the viewer the intricacies of being a Métis person, and which was a mix of First Nations and European that originated more in the 1700s, and following the lineage there. Some more personal, like today, issues that I was living with, and so belonging, I feel like I've arrived. So in facing the camera, I acknowledge this community that I'm a part of, which felt really good to belong to this larger community where I didn't necessarily know all the people, and it's just a very small portion. It sounds like a lot, 500, but there's way more artists out there, and curators and people working in the arts community. For my own more personal work, I'm highlighting my family and the history and my own struggles as a person, as an individual, trying to express some of my concerns. I think it's really important for me to explain to the viewer what being a Métis person is. It's very complicated. It's, we don't have, for most Métis people, there's no land base, and that was lost in the colonization process. So a lot of people that are Métis have been invisible, and that was part of survival historically. But today, in contemporary terms, we're not First Nations, we're not Inuit, we're one of the 3 Canadian recognized Indigenous peoples. So that as a concept and as a living reality is challenging. And so I'm putting myself out there and my family out there, saying, this is one example of who we are. Not everyone, we're not all alike certainly, but this is an example of who we are and where we come from, and where I come from individually, where my family, what we grew up, what we looked like, what our snapshots were, what our journey was. So my work represents that. And then within facing the camera, there are, although I don't state that in the work, but there's Métis, First Nations and Inuit folks. So I don't differentiate that in a sense. In those portraits, I indicate the name of the person and where I photographed them and what year, but yeah. I guess the big thing is I feel like I belong now. I belong somewhere, and I'm comfortable. I feel more comfortable in my own skin. When I was younger, I wasn't comfortable. It's like, who am I? Where do I come from? What are my, am I okay? There was more insecurity, and there was more searching, because I was uncertain, I was searching. And throughout the work, that indicates and demonstrates how I've changed. And for me, I'm quite comfortable being who I am, and certainly not perfection, but this is me evolved. And it's funny because I've done a lot of self-portraits, and sometimes I have to remind people that this self-portrait of a younger woman is the same person as that contemporary, today's image of me. And in that respect, I really am thankful for being able to live this life and look back and say, oh, this is my younger self searching, and this is myself today searching. And there's been 42 plus years of certainly searching. So, yeah. When I learned photography, I love taking pictures, but when I learned how to be in the darkroom, I loved it. There's nothing like the magic of doing your photograph in a tray and seeing that image come up. That image there's magic. And I wanted to learn more, and I went off to school and studied and learned more about the history of, how the photography was situated kind of separately from art history, because it was something that was recording and documenting, and yet very much part of that. The whole idea of a photograph telling the truth, so contemporary photographers play with that, but early on understanding that, and then wanting to do work that was meaningful to me. So you learn the tools of the trade, learn how to expose that film and not ruin it when you're developing it, and then how to make prints that look the way you want them to look in the darkroom. And I learned so much about photography and myself, and I just always wanted more. It's just a huge world of, the history of photography, contemporary practices. I wanted to speak my truth, because although I loved documentary photography, I felt like I was telling someone else's story and questioned whether I had the right to tell somebody else's story. It kind of, all of this knowledge ruined my vacations and taking pictures of other cultures. I felt really committed to imaging, presenting, photographing my own culture, and specifically my own life. So that's why it looks a little introspective or self-concerned, but I can only speak for me. This is my life, my practice, and there's other people that I meet and encounter within that. But it's, and I hate to say this, it's about me, because I can't speak for you, So the photo sessions, like certainly the weekend they did 175, I did not get to know them. They may have been in front of my camera for 5 minutes. When I started photographing with film, my medium format camera took 10 photos on one roll of film. So I would do 10 exposures, and from that select one. As I got into digital, of course, I could take way more, but if I took like 100 of them, then I'd be looking through all of that. And so it was fairly limited in the amount of time. Some of the people I met the moment they stood in front of the camera, some I'd known for years, and it's kind of fun trying to figure out who's who, and I tried to make people comfortable. And ultimately, I wanted them to look like they felt good, and which is a big challenge, because not everyone is comfortable standing with lights around them and feeling self-conscious. So that was something that people said, well, how do you get that photo? So about 8 years in, I thought, well, I'll videotape the session. So I set the video camera up in front of me, and then I kind of stood above the video, and I videotaped. And it was interesting to see people's comfort or discomfort, and a lot of laughing goes on, and a lot of me saying I'm going to tell a joke, but I don't know any, and so it shows the unease, but also the brief encounter. And I've since made a video of that so that people can have a little peek inside what went on behind the scenes, just to give a little more insight. I still am happy with the portraits being a still photo, and yeah, I certainly don't pretend to think that I know them or the viewer will know them. I very rarely know anything about the artist. Maybe in the taking the pictures we might say, oh, what kind of art do you do? But that's not reflected in the portrait of them. It's, you know, a picture of them, their face, their body, and yeah. So, and I titled the image with their name, identifying them, and where we met. So again, it's sort of about my journey of where I met people. So it would be nice to know who those people are, but I also put that onto the viewer. You know, if I see somebody, to check online or research or learn more about them. But I also wanted people to be able to go, oh, that's who that is. I've seen their work for years. I would never recognize, you know, I didn't know what they look like. So again, trying to give people make them aware of these people, of the artists, and maybe encounter them down the road, and then ultimately preserve the portraits so that people can see them in the future and go, oh, that's who that was. Oh, look, that was early in their practice, or yeah, connect to them in some way. I guess I would prefer to show the joy because we're celebrating, or I'd like to celebrate the individuals in the portraits. And I want the viewer to be invited in to meet them. And not everyone looks happy and laughing. You know, some people prefer to have a more stern look, and I respect that, you know. But I want it to be a happy meeting, you know, and I want the people to look good, or what my interpretation of good might be, so that they look happy, and that they're happy with what stands as their portrait, you know. Early on in the project, I would send people the contact sheets and say, these are the ones I'm thinking of using, what do you think? And then as it grew and it became challenging to have that communication, I would pick one that I thought was good out of the 10 or so images. It was really good to see, like I just walked in the gallery. I was like, wow, look at all my friends. Like, look at that body of work, and I haven't seen that one for a while because some of the work's in collections and I just haven't visited with them myself. And thinking, whoa, I've been around a while. And that was, you know, kind of connecting them to them individually, and then seeing the abundance of images. It was overwhelming. I was very touched to see that. I'm really pleased with the exhibition and the attention that my work is getting, and to see it all collected was very exciting for me, you know. I like to show my family and show the viewer where I came from. I'm very fortunate to have had a wonderful childhood and parents who created this feeling of family, and that really reflects, I think, my work and wanting to belong. And although I think part of the feeling that I didn't belong is that usual teenage angst, you know, you leave home as a young person and go, who am I out in this big world? But that my family, the roots, and then further exploring the history of my family and how that fits into the broader history of the struggle of the Métis people for recognition. Yeah, I think that that's really important. Again, it connects to what the idea of I can only speak for myself, you know. So my family wasn't part of a Métis community. Geographically, I grew up in Winnipeg, which is this whole blend of Indigenous people coming in from communities, because Winnipeg was where you went to try and eke out a living to raise your families or whatever. So that's where I grew up, was within that. And I forget the rest of the question, but I think, is that good?
Yeah, and I think if you wanted to touch on how popular culture also plays a role in your process.
I don't only look at my family. Part of my growing up was way back when television had 3 channels. And before the remote, I would sit right close in front of the TV, and I was the remote. I would click and turn the channels. There was knobs then, and you would. I loved watching the moving pictures. You know, Sunday afternoons I'd watch these old movies from the 50s, you know, or earlier. And I was always, as I grew, I was watching for, I guess, reflections of who I was. Like, so often people look for, oh, that's a story about those people, but what about mine? And I loved watching television shows of strong, heroic women, you know. So I watched The Bionic Woman, I watched The Avengers, I watched Xena Warrior Princess. When I found her, she spoke to my heart, you know, just that excitement and her adventureness. Xena Warrior Princess was so adventurous, you know, and she fought for the good of people, and, you know, yeah, I really traveled a lot in her world. And I connected to that so much so is that I became my own version of a warrior princess, a plains warrior artist, and started to do self-portraits where I dressed up looking like Xena and then taking on different battles and challenges. And yeah, that was, so even in the series Longing and Not Belonging, I do have Linda Hamilton from the Terminator, and like I said, the Bionic Woman, and different people, and I would put them, their triptychs, so I would put family members, the women in the family that I wasn't really clear at that point, but they were heroic. They were equally out there leading the way. So sort of that blend, you know, I did one, I woke to find my spirit had returned. I loved the Wizard of Oz movie. And so I placed myself as Dorothy, and she followed the yellow brick road while I followed the red road, trying to find my Métis self, my Métis identity. And so I played with that and had Louis Riel be the wizard. And that was a lot of fun, you know, playing off of, I play off of a lot of popular cultural, yeah. Living Evidence is a series of photos I took of my at this point, a woman that I was in love with and involved with. And we went through happy times and sad times, tumultuous times. And I loved the Polaroid SX70, so I loved the look of that film. And so I guess that was the selfie of the day. Like, that was like your cell phone. The Polaroid gave you an instant one, whereas film, you had to go develop it. And so you could take the picture and look at it and take another one or whatever. So after the relationship was over, I was left with these boxes of photos and trying to make sense of what happened, you know, like, what do I do? How do I go on now? And so I made these Polaroids large, and then took an ink pen, an ink marker. I made these large images and then took an oil marker and wrote on them feelings and thoughts from my journals. And so I presented these portraits of her and selfies of the two of us with these different pain and trying to make sense of this love and then the loss of it. And I was ready to, I framed them on mat board with photo corners so they look like they're from my personal album. And I was ready to send them to an exhibition. And then there was the question of outing somebody, and that had been done by other artists in the community where this was going to be shown. And so I took duct tape, essentially, and I put a black piece of tape over her eyes to protect her. And in the process, it pushed me to the front because I didn't put the black tape on me. So I sort of came out in that sense and revealed myself. And it sort of gave me strength to go on. And the title, Living Evidence, was the evidence of this relationship having happened. And then I go on. So that was that one. And the Plains Warrior Artist then came after I recovered and was really into Xena, and longing and not belonging had happened. And I thought, well, instead of looking for a warrior woman to admire out in the world in popular culture and in my family, it was time for me to step up and become my own warrior and to believe in myself. So I started with dressing, well, I was learning Photoshop. I mean, this is the 1999, can you believe it? And I was learning, a friend had said, you know what, you can put your head on somebody else's body. It's like, really? So I put my head on Xena's body, and I started to play out these ideas. So again, putting myself in and mixing that with the popular culture of Xena. I also did, the Wizard of Oz, and I became Dorothy. I looked at the movie called The Children's Hour, and I put myself as a little girl in that one because I saw it when I was younger. So I played out different scenarios that I was battling with. Well, early on, as a teenager, and I started studying photography in my late teens and my early 20s, and I learned the tools, how to develop film, all of that. And I was given an assignment when I was going to school and studying at Ryerson, which is now TMU. And I was giving an assignment to do like a documentary, social document of somebody, something. And I decided I had met these two women who were living out in the country and raising their two daughters. And for me, still working out, well, what is a family? And how do I, as a young woman who loved women, how do I have a family? And so I went there and I photographed, and they, invited me into their home. I became like a fly on the wall and seeing what they were up to. And I went a few times there, and that became Family Circle. So I played out my struggles of what's possibilities, what are the possibilities? And also holding up with pride. I mean, this was in the early 80s when there were raids in the bathhouses and when pride marches first started happening in Toronto. And so this was part of that as well, an awareness of women's rights and lesbian rights and celebrating, even within this oppressive culture, but finding celebration and recognition for this lifestyle. So, yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, I hope that people can connect with the different images or all of the work, not all of it, some of the work. So everyone has a family that they grew up, whether it was a warm, fuzzy family or struggles and, whatever, but and everyone has a relationship with photographs. And prior to cell phones, people would put a roll of film in their camera and get these snapshots printed out, and some would put them in albums, some would put them in a box. So people come in and connect, and although it's a different family and maybe different things being pointed out in my work, that they'll connect on just a human level, that they'll connect or understand, what would two women in the early 80s who loved each other and made a family, what would that look like? So in a way, I definitely made the work for myself. I was motivated to make this work that I feel really strongly about, that the work has lasted, it's still relevant today, even though it was made, some of it 20, 30, 40 years ago, that there's still a relevance and there's still something that people can connect to. Out of the over 100 pieces, there might just be one. But I'm inviting people into this world, my world, and showing them how I feel I belong and sharing it with others. And I hope they walk away with a smile or with some thoughts that they start percolating, or just appreciate the amount of years that I've been practicing and what constitutes a life of making art. Yeah. I don't have anything on the burner right now as far as new work. I have a lot of thoughts and ideas, and one thing I'd like to do is, believe it, focus more on Métis artists and community, and maybe do more portraits, not in the style of facing the camera, but more, just more. I did a project called Wrapped in Culture, where I had been in Australia on a residency, and I met these Australian artists, and I invited them back, and we did a project of making a buffalo robe and a possum skin cloak. And that was really exciting, to work with other artists. As a photographer, you tend to work alone. I've also started, so I would love to do future projects with others. Another thing is I've started painting, and in a realist style. I didn't learn early on, so it's just the last number of years that I've been painting. And I paint my photographs. So I paint and my parents' photographs and both my grandparents' photos. So I'm really enjoying that. And partly I think I know I miss being in the darkroom. I know that still happens in the world there, but I've moved away from that. And so the painting really is feeding that creative wonder of being in a darkroom and watching something develop. So, yeah.